The gunshots echoing across the Montana prairie brought Delilah Johnson's flight to an abrupt halt, her heart pounding as frantically as the hoofbeats that pursued her. She clutched her swollen belly protectively, praying her 7-month child wouldn't choose this moment to make its presence known, as she urged her exhausted mare forward through the tall grass toward the silhouette of Grass Valley in the distance. Montana Territory, 1878. The land was as unforgiving as the men who sought to claim it, and nowhere was this more evident than in Delilah's desperate situation. At 22, widowed and carrying her late husband's child, she had become an unexpected target for the Blackwell Gang outlaws who believed she knew the location of gold her husband had supposedly hidden before his death. "There she is," a gruff voice called from behind. "Don't let her reach town." Delilah's mare stumbled slightly, fatigue evident in its labored breathing. She couldn't outrun them much longer. The outlaws had caught up with her 3 miles outside of Grass Valley, far enough from help that her screams would go unheard. Tears streamed down her face as she contemplated the terrible fate that awaited her and her unborn child. The first outlaw reached her, grabbing her reins and yanking her horse to a stop. The mare whinnied in protest as Delilah struggled to maintain her seat, her golden hair falling from its pins and whipping around her face in the wind. "Thought you could run from us, Mrs. Johnson?" The man's breath reeked of whiskey as he leered at her, his hand reaching for her arm. "Boss wants a word with you about that gold." "I've told you 1,000 times," Delilah gasped, shrinking away from his touch. "There is no gold. Thomas never had any treasure, liar." Another rider approached, his face half hidden beneath a filthy bandana. "Your husband stole from the Blackwell Gang, and you're gonna tell us where he hid it." The leader of the group, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running from his left eye to his chin, rode up beside them. "Get her off that horse. We'll make camp in that grove and have ourselves a proper conversation." The malice in his voice made Delilah's blood run cold. Just as rough hands began to pull her from the saddle, a single shot cracked through the air. The man grabbing her jerked back suddenly, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped through his fingers. "Let the lady go." The voice was steady, calm, and carried absolute authority. Delilah turned to see a lone rider approaching, rifle raised and ready for another shot. He sat tall in the saddle atop a magnificent black stallion, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The setting sun silhouetted him against the horizon, lending him an almost mythical appearance. "This ain't your business, mister," the gang leader snarled, though his hand hovered nervously over his holstered gun. "I'm making it my business." The stranger's voice remained level as he drew closer. "The lady clearly doesn't want your company, and I've never been one to ignore a woman in distress." Delilah saw his features clearly now, strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble, piercing blue eyes that assessed the situation with practiced precision, and shoulders broad from years of hard work. He couldn't be much older than 30, but something in his gaze spoke of experiences that had aged him beyond his years. "There's 5 of us and only one of you," the scarred leader pointed out, gaining confidence as the outlaws spread out, hands moving toward their weapons. "Then it's hardly fair," the stranger replied, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips, "but I'll try not to hurt too many of you." His eyes flicked briefly to Delilah, noting her condition. "Madam, when I give the word, I need you to ride hard for those rocks to my left." Delilah nodded, gathering her reins tightly. What happened next unfolded with such speed that later Delilah could hardly piece it together. The stranger fired twice more in rapid succession, one bullet finding the leader's gun arm and the other striking another outlaw's leg. As confusion erupted among the gang, the stranger shouted, "Now, madam?" Delilah didn't hesitate. She dug her heels into her mare's sides and galloped toward the rocky outcropping. Behind her, she heard more gunshots, shouts, and the thunder of hooves. Fear kept her from looking back until she reached the shelter of the rocks, where she finally turned to see the stranger galloping toward her. 3 of the outlaws in disorganized pursuit, while 2 remained behind, one clutching his shoulder and the other struggling to mount with an injured leg. The stranger reached her side, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Stay down," he instructed, positioning himself at the edge of the rocks with his rifle. He fired 2 warning shots that sent the pursuing outlaws veering away, apparently deciding the prey wasn't worth the risk. Only when they had disappeared over a distant ridge did the stranger lower his weapon. He turned to Delilah, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you hurt, madam?" Delilah realized she was trembling uncontrollably. "No," she managed, then gasped as a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. The baby alarm flashed across the man's face. He knelt beside her, gently helping her to a more comfortable position against the rocks. "Easy now, deep breaths." His voice had softened, all traces of the hard-edged gunman momentarily gone. "My name's Daniel Archer. I've got a cabin not far from here. Can you ride a little longer?" Delilah nodded, fighting back tears of relief and lingering fear. "Delilah Johnson," she whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Archer." They would have, she couldn't finish the sentence. "They'll never touch you or your child again," Daniel promised, his voice carrying such conviction that Delilah couldn't help but believe him. "I give you my word." As he helped her back onto her horse, Delilah studied his face. There was kindness there beneath the weathered exterior, but also something guarded, as if he carried his own burdens. Whatever had brought Daniel Archer to that precise spot at that precise moment, Delilah could only consider it divine providence. The cabin stood in a small clearing backed by pine trees, with a corral for horses and a modest garden plot beside it. It wasn't large, but it was sturdy and well-maintained, speaking to its owner's careful nature. By the time they arrived, the sun had fully set, and Daniel lit lanterns as he helped Delilah inside. "It's not much," he said apologetically, clearing some books from the table to make space. "But it's warm and those outlaws won't find us here." "It's perfect," Delilah replied honestly, easing herself into a chair. The contractions that had started during their ride had subsided, much to her relief. False labor, brought on by stress and fear, Daniel busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans, dried beef, and biscuits. As he worked, Delilah observed her rescuer more carefully. His movements were efficient, economical, suggesting military training. Yet there was nothing harsh about him now, in fact. There was almost a gentleness to the way he arranged the food on a plate for her. "You're not from around here," Daniel noted as he placed the meal before her. It wasn't a question. "No, I came from Ohio with my husband Thomas last year. He had dreams of starting a cattle ranch." Delilah's voice caught. "He was killed 3 months ago." "Supposedly in a card game dispute, but I never believed that story." Daniel sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "And the men today, what did they want?" "They're convinced Thomas stole gold from their gang before he died. They think I know where it is." She shook her head. "But there never was any gold. Thomas wasn't a thief. He was a dreamer, perhaps too trusting, but not a criminal." "The Blackwell Gang doesn't usually make mistakes about such things," Daniel observed. "They're notorious throughout the territory." "Well, they're mistaken about this." Delilah placed a protective hand over her belly. "I've been trying to sell our land claim and return east before the baby comes, but they found me as I was leaving the lawyer's office in Helena. I've been running for 3 days. Daniel's eyes softened with sympathy. "You're safe here for now. Tomorrow we can figure out what to do next." He paused, seeming to hesitate before adding, "If you don't mind my asking, how far along are you?" "About 7 months, Delilah answered, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "The doctor in Helena said everything looks healthy, at least." Daniel nodded. "Get some rest, Mrs. Johnson. You can take the bed. I'll keep watch tonight. Please call me Delilah," she insisted. "And I couldn't possibly take your bed. You can and you will," Daniel said firmly, though his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "I've slept in far worse conditions than my own floor. Besides," he added more solemnly, "a lady in your condition needs proper rest." Too exhausted to argue further, Delilah allowed him to lead her to the small bedroom at the back of the cabin. The bed was neatly made, the quilt faded but clean. As she sank onto the mattress, a wave of fatigue washed over her. "Thank you," she murmured as Daniel turned to leave. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." He paused in the doorway. "Get some sleep, Delilah, you're safe now." As the door closed softly behind him, Delilah found herself wondering about the quiet, capable man who had risked his life for a stranger. There was a story there. She was certain perhaps one as complicated as her own. For the first time in months, despite the danger still lurking beyond the cabin walls, Delilah felt something close to peace as she drifted into sleep. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Montana hills. Delilah woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the previous day's events came rushing back. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main room where she found Daniel already awake, tending the fire. "Morning," he greeted her. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some." "Thank you." Delilah accepted the offered cup gratefully, warming her hands around it. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough." Daniel's noncommittal answer suggested otherwise, but his movements showed no sign of fatigue as he prepared a breakfast of flapjacks. "How are you feeling? Any more pains?" Delilah shook her head. "No, I think it was just the stress. The baby's been quiet this morning." "Good." Daniel seemed genuinely relieved. "After breakfast, we should talk about what happens next. Those men won't give up easily." They ate in comfortable silence, and Delilah found herself studying her host when he wasn't looking. In the morning light, she could see details she'd missed the night before: a small scar near his right temple, the slight creases at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he concentrated, the careful way he handled everything, as if measuring each movement. "You were in the army," she guessed as they cleared the dishes. Daniel glanced at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Cavalry. 8 years, was it that obvious? The way you move," Delilah explained. "My father was a colonel in the Union Army. I recognize the bearing." A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. "Well observed, Mrs. J. Delilah," he corrected himself. "I served mostly on the frontier, left the service 3 years ago to become a rancher, something like that." His tone suggested the topic wasn't open for further discussion. "Now, about your situation. Those outlaws will be looking for both of us now. Grass Valley is the nearest town, but it's small, not many places to hide." "I was heading to the railhead in Garrison," Delilah said. "I have a ticket east on tomorrow's train. My aunt in Cincinnati has offered me a home until after." Daniel considered this. "Garrison's a full day's ride. We'd be exposed on the trail." He frowned thoughtfully. "The Blackwell Gang will expect you to head for town. They'll likely have men watching the main roads." "What about your home?" Delilah gestured around them. "Won't they find us here?" "Few people know about this place," Daniel replied. "But you're right, it's not safe to stay too long." He paced the small room, thinking. "There's a back trail through the mountains. Rough going, but it comes out just a couple miles from Garrison. We could leave at dusk, travel by night." Delilah's hand went instinctively to her belly. "I'm not sure I can manage a mountain trail in my condition." Daniel's expression softened. "I wouldn't suggest it if I thought it would harm you or your child. The trail's steep in places, but not dangerous. We'd take it slow." "And what about after?" Delilah asked quietly. "Once I'm safely on that train, what happens to you? These men know your face now." A hardness settled over Daniel's features. "The Blackwell Gang and I were bound to cross paths eventually. I've been tracking them for months." "Why?" Delilah's curiosity got the better of her. Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "Same reason as you. They killed someone I cared about. My partner and I had a small ranch south of here. Jacob went to town one day for supplies and got caught in the crossfire when the gang robbed the bank. He wasn't even armed." "I'm so sorry," Delilah whispered, recognizing the weight of loss they both carried. Daniel acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "I sold the ranch after that, moved out here, been gathering information, waiting for the right time." His jaw tightened. "Though I hadn't planned on making my move quite so publicly." You've been planning to go after them alone." "That's suicide," Delilah protested. "Not alone. I've been in contact with a U.S. Marshal in Helena. He's been building a case against them for months." Daniel's eyes met hers. "Your story about the gold could be important. If your husband didn't steal it, why are they so convinced he did?" Delilah frowned. "I don't know. Thomas worked odd jobs when we first arrived, ranching mostly, but some mining too. He was friendly, talked to everyone. Maybe he heard something he wasn't supposed to. Or saw something," Daniel mused. "Did he ever mention anything unusual? Any strange behavior from people he worked with?" Delilah thought back, trying to recall any conversations that might have seemed insignificant at the time. "He did mention a man named Fletcher once. Said he was nervous, drinking heavily. Thomas thought he was in some kind of trouble." Daniel's expression sharpened. "Fletcher, bald fellow with a limp, I think so. Thomas said he worked in the assay office in Helena." "He was found dead 6 months ago," Daniel said grimly. "Official reports said he fell down a mine shaft while drunk, but there were rumors it wasn't an accident." A chill ran through Delilah. "You think Thomas knew something about Fletcher's death? Or about whatever Fletcher was involved in?" Daniel replied. "The timing fits. The assay office would be the perfect place to fence stolen gold without raising suspicions." The pieces were beginning to connect. "So if Fletcher was helping the gang launder their gold, and your husband somehow found out about it," Daniel continued, "they might assume he knew where their latest shipment was hidden." Delilah leaned back in her chair, momentarily overwhelmed. "All this time I thought they were just common thieves making up stories about gold. But it's real, isn't it? There really is stolen gold." "Likely," Daniel agreed. "Though that doesn't mean your husband had anything to do with it. He might have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time." A sudden thought struck Delilah. "Thomas kept a journal. I packed it with my things when I left Helena." She moved to retrieve her satchel, which Daniel had brought in from her horse the night before. After a moment of searching, she produced a worn leather-bound book. "I never read it. It felt too private somehow, even after he was gone." Daniel accepted the journal with careful hands. "May I?" Delilah nodded. As Daniel began to leaf through the pages, she watched his expression grow increasingly focused. After several minutes, he stopped on a particular entry, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Listen to this," he said. "Met F. Again today. He's terrified, says they'll kill him if he doesn't move the shipment soon. Mentioned something about Elkhorn Creek and a lightning-struck pine. Said it wasn't right, taking from the government. I told him to go to the marshal, but he says they have men everywhere. Don't know how to help him." "Elkhorn Creek," Delilah repeated. "That's not far from our claim. Thomas used to fish there sometimes." Daniel turned a few more pages. "Here's another entry, dated a week before your husband's death. Went to the creek today. Saw the pine F mentioned. Someone's been digging recently. I marked the spot in my survey map in case F needs proof when he goes to the authorities." "A survey map," Delilah frowned. "Thomas had one drawn up when we filed our claim. It should be with my papers." She returned to her satchel, rifling through the documents until she found a folded piece of parchment. Spreading it on the table, they both leaned over it, searching. "There," Daniel pointed to a small mark near the boundary of the Johnson claim, where Elkhorn Creek curved around a rocky outcropping. A tiny X had been penciled in, so small it would be easily overlooked by casual observation. "That must be it," Delilah breathed. "The stolen gold." Daniel's expression was grim. "And the reason the Blackwell Gang won't give up looking for you, they think you know exactly where this is." "But I didn't," Delilah protested. "I had no idea." "They wouldn't believe that," Daniel said, carefully refolding the map. "Men like that assume everyone thinks the way they do, that no wife would ignore the chance to find hidden treasure." "What do we do now?" Delilah asked, suddenly feeling the weight of their discovery. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "This changes our plans. If we can secure this gold, we can use it as leverage. Better yet, we can get it to the marshal as evidence." "You want to go after the gold?" Delilah stared at him in disbelief. "That's even more dangerous than running." "Not necessarily," Daniel argued. The location is close to your claim, which you know well. We could retrieve it and be on our way to Garrison before they realize what we're doing. Most of the gang will be watching the roads to town, not your abandoned property. And if we're caught, Delilah couldn't keep the fear from her voice. Daniel met her gaze steadily. I meant what I said yesterday. They'll never touch you or your child. I'll see you safely out of this, Delilah, one way or another. The conviction in his voice should have been reassuring, but Delilah couldn't help noticing how alone they were, one pregnant woman and one man, no matter how capable, against a gang of ruthless outlaws. Still, the alternative was to keep running, perhaps for years, always looking over her shoulder. When would we go? She asked finally. Today. As soon as possible, Daniel replied, already moving to gather supplies. We can reach your claim by midday if we ride carefully, get the gold, then continue to Elkhorn Pass. We'll still reach Garrison by tomorrow morning. As Daniel prepared for their journey, Delilah found herself watching him with a mixture of fear and growing admiration. There was something undeniably compelling about him, not just his physical strength or his evident skill with weapons, but the quiet certainty with which he moved through the world. In the short time she'd known him, Daniel Archer had shown more integrity and kindness than most men she'd met in her entire life. Why are you helping me? She asked suddenly. You could have just escorted me to town yesterday and been done with it. This isn't your fight. Daniel paused in checking his rifle. Maybe not originally, he acknowledged, but I've never been able to walk away from someone in trouble, especially not when that trouble comes from men like the Blackwell Gang. A shadow crossed his face. Besides, you're not the only one with a score to settle. Delilah nodded, understanding the grief that clearly still haunted him. Your partner, Jacob, you were close, like brothers, Daniel said simply. We served together in the cavalry, came out here to start fresh after the army. He was a good man, didn't deserve to die that way. I'm sorry, Delilah said again, wishing the words didn't feel so inadequate. Daniel's expression softened slightly. What about you? Will your aunt welcome both you and the child? She says she will, Delilah replied, uncertainty coloring her tone. But an unmarried pregnant widow isn't exactly a welcome addition to any household, even family. Your husband's been gone only 3 months, Daniel observed. Surely no one would question Thomas and I had been estranged. For some time before his death, Delilah admitted quietly. He was a kind man in many ways, but he had demons he couldn't control. The drinking got worse after our dreams of a ranch kept facing setbacks. Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. I see. The child is his, Delilah clarified quickly, but we hadn't shared a marriage in the true sense for nearly a year before he died. He knew about the baby, was even excited in his way, but she trailed off, embarrassed to have revealed so much. People make mistakes, Daniel said simply. What matters is what you do next. He glanced at her belly. That child is lucky to have a mother brave enough to risk everything for its future. Delilah felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. Thank you for not judging. I've seen enough of the world to know that judging others is a fool's errand, Daniel replied, returning to his preparations. We should leave within the hour. The sooner we retrieve that gold, the sooner you'll be safely on that train east. As they readied the horses, Delilah couldn't help but wonder if Daniel's determination to see her safely away stemmed purely from his sense of duty, or if perhaps there was something more developing between them. The thought was inappropriate given their circumstances. They were virtual strangers thrown together by danger, and yet she couldn't deny the strange connection she felt to this quiet, honorable man. Such thoughts, she reminded herself firmly, were merely the product of gratitude and her vulnerable situation. Once safely back in Cincinnati, surrounded by the trappings of civilization, these confused feelings would surely fade. Still, as Daniel helped her mount her mare, his strong hands gentle at her waist, Delilah couldn't quite convince her quickening heartbeat to believe that. They traveled cautiously, keeping to wooded areas where possible and avoiding the main trails. Daniel rode slightly ahead, constantly scanning their surroundings with the vigilance of a man who expected trouble at any moment. Delilah found his alertness both reassuring and unsettling, a reminder that their danger was far from past. "We're about a mile from your claim now," Daniel informed her as they paused to rest the horses near a small stream. "From here, we should approach more carefully. I'll scout ahead to make sure no one's watching the property." "I should go with you," Delilah insisted. "I know every inch of that land. I can show you exactly where Elkhorn Creek meets our boundary." Daniel frowned. "It's too dangerous." "More dangerous than waiting alone," Delilah countered. "Besides, that map doesn't show the exact spot. The X Thomas marked is approximate at best." After a moment's consideration, Daniel nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me. If I signal you to hide, do it immediately, no questions." They proceeded with even greater caution, leading their horses the final half-mile to minimize noise. As they crested a small rise, the Johnson homestead came into view, a modest cabin similar to Daniel's, though less well-maintained, with a small barn and corral beside it. The place had a forlorn, abandoned look that tugged at Delilah's heart despite the circumstances of her departure. "No horses in sight," Daniel murmured, surveying the property through a small spyglass. "No smoke from the chimney either. Looks deserted." "The creek is beyond that stand of cottonwoods," Delilah pointed. "The lightning-struck pine would be somewhere along the bank." They tethered their horses in a concealed spot and approached on foot, moving from cover to cover. Daniel insisted on checking the cabin first, ensuring no one was hiding inside. The interior was dusty but undisturbed, suggesting no one had entered since Delilah left. "Let's find that pine tree," Daniel said once they were certain the property was secure. "We shouldn't linger here longer than necessary." Delilah led the way to Elkhorn Creek, a swift-flowing stream that marked the northern boundary of the Johnson claim. They followed it upstream, searching both banks for a pine tree bearing lightning damage. There, Delilah spotted it first, a tall ponderosa pine with a jagged scar running down its trunk where lightning had struck it. "That must be it." Daniel surveyed the area carefully. "The ground's been disturbed recently," he observed, pointing to an area near the tree's massive roots. "Someone's been digging. Fletcher? Or the gang coming back to check their hiding place?" Delilah wondered aloud. "Hard to say," Daniel replied, kneeling to examine the soil more closely. "But it was within the last week or so. The earth hasn't fully settled." He produced a small, folding shovel from his pack and began to dig where the soil looked loosest. Delilah kept watch, her nerves on edge as she scanned the surrounding woodland for any sign of movement. After several minutes of digging, Daniel's shovel struck something solid. He worked more carefully then, using his hands to brush away dirt until a metal box about the size of a large book emerged from the soil. "This is it," he said, working the simple latch. The lid opened to reveal several leather pouches. Daniel untied one, pouring a stream of gold nuggets into his palm. "Government gold, just as your husband suspected. Probably stolen from a shipment meant for the mint in Helena." Delilah stared at the gleaming metal, feeling strangely disconnected from the treasure that had cost her husband his life. "How much do you think is there?" "Enough to kill for," Daniel said grimly, returning the nuggets to their pouch. "Thousands of dollars worth at least." He closed the box securely and wrapped it in his coat before placing it in his saddlebag. "Let's get moving. I don't like being this exposed." They had just reached their horses when the distinctive crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. A bullet splintered bark from a tree inches from Daniel's head. "Down," Daniel shouted, drawing his revolver as he pushed Delilah behind the thick trunk of a fallen tree. 3 riders emerged from the trees on the opposite bank of the creek, rifles raised. Delilah recognized the scarred leader from the previous day, his arm now bandaged but obviously still functional enough to aim a weapon. "Thought you might come back here, Mrs. Johnson," he called across the water. "Mighty convenient of you to lead us straight to our property." "It's not your property, Blackwell," Daniel shouted back, carefully positioning himself to shield Delilah. That's government gold you stole. Details, the outlaw leader dismissed with a wave of his hand. Now you've got two choices: leave the box and ride away, or die where you stand. I'm feeling generous enough to let you choose. And a third option, Daniel replied calmly. You turn around and leave before I put a bullet between your eyes. Blackwell laughed. Bold talk from a man outgunned 3-1, 4-1 actually, came a new voice from behind them. Delilah's heart sank as she turned to see a fourth outlaw stepping from the trees, rifle trained on them. He must have circled around while they were focused on the men across the creek. Looks like your luck's run out, hero, the newcomer sneered, moving closer. Daniel's expression remained impassive, but Delilah could see him calculating their dwindling options. The gold wasn't worth their lives, but she suspected the outlaws wouldn't let them walk away regardless. They'd seen too much, could identify the gang to authorities. What happened next would forever be seared into Delilah's memory. With movement so swift, it seemed almost supernatural. Daniel spun and fired at the outlaw behind them, his bullet finding its mark in the man's shoulder. As the wounded man stumbled backward, Daniel grabbed Delilah's arm. Run. He ordered, firing 2 more shots toward the men across the creek, forcing them to take cover. They sprinted for their horses, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. Daniel practically threw Delilah onto her mare before vaulting onto his own stallion, the saddlebag containing the gold secure across his back. Head for the trees, Daniel shouted as they urged their mounts forward, keeping low in the saddle. More gunfire erupted behind them as the outlaws gave chase, but the dense forest soon provided cover as they weaved between trees too close together for a clear shot. Daniel led them along game trails too narrow for side-by-side riding, forcing their pursuers to follow in single file, a tactical advantage that allowed him to set a punishing pace while minimizing their exposure. For nearly an hour they rode hard, changing direction frequently to confuse their trail. Only when they reached a rocky stream bed that would hide their tracks did Daniel finally signal a slower pace. We need to let the horses recover, he explained, patting his stallion's lathered neck. And we should check if you're injured. I'm fine, Delilah assured him, though her heart still raced from their narrow escape. What about you? Daniel grimaced slightly, and Delilah noticed for the first time that he was holding his left arm stiffly against his side. You're hit, she gasped, dismounting as quickly as her condition allowed. It's nothing. Bullet grazed my ribs, Daniel dismissed, though he allowed Delilah to help him down from his horse. Once on the ground, he swayed slightly before catching himself against the saddle. That doesn't look like nothing, Delilah insisted, guiding him to sit on a fallen log. Let me see. Reluctantly, Daniel unbuttoned his shirt to reveal an angry wound along his left side, not deep enough to be life-threatening, but bloody enough to be concerning. I have some supplies in my saddlebag, Delilah said, retrieving a small medical kit she had packed for her journey. With gentle hands, she cleaned the wound, applied a poultice of herbs she'd brought for emergencies, and bound it with strips of clean cloth. Where did you learn to do that? Daniel asked, watching her work with a mixture of pain and admiration. My father insisted I learn basic field medicine during the war, Delilah explained. He said every woman should know how to treat injuries, especially on the frontier. She tied off the bandage with a neat knot. It needs stitches, but this will hold until we can reach proper help. Thank you, Daniel said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. His eyes held hers for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them before he looked away, clearing his throat. We should keep moving. Elkhorn Pass is still several hours' ride and we've lost time. You shouldn't be riding at all, Delilah objected. That wound could reopen. We don't have much choice, Daniel replied grimly. Those men will keep coming. Our only advantage is that they don't know which route we're taking to Garrison. Delilah helped him back onto his horse, worry etching lines in her forehead as she saw him wince with the effort. Despite his insistence that he was fine, Daniel's complexion had paled. and a fine sheen of sweat covered his brow despite the cool day. They continued at a slower pace, following the stream bed for nearly a mile before turning onto a narrow trail that climbed steadily upward into the mountains. As they ascended, the forest thinned, replaced by rocky slopes and hardy mountain pines. The air grew noticeably cooler as afternoon waned toward evening. "We'll need to make camp soon," Daniel said as the first hints of sunset colored the western sky. "There's a sheltered spot about half a mile ahead out of the wind with good visibility." Delilah nodded, too exhausted to argue. The baby had been restless for the past hour, kicking vigorously as if protesting the long hours of riding. Her back ached fiercely, and worry for Daniel's condition only added to her discomfort. The campsite proved to be a small cave, more of a deep overhang really, set into the mountainside with a clear view of the trail they had ascended. Daniel insisted on checking it thoroughly before allowing Delilah to enter, ensuring no wild animals had claimed it first. "No fire tonight," he instructed as they unsaddled the horses. "Too visible from below. You need warm food," Delilah protested. "And that wound will heal just fine," Daniel finished firmly. "We can risk a small fire after full dark, just enough to heat some water for tea, but no more." They made a cold meal from the provisions in their saddlebags: jerky, hard biscuits, and dried fruit. Daniel ate little, concerning Delilah further. She noticed how he moved with increasing stiffness, how each adjustment of position brought a flicker of pain to his eyes. When they had finished eating, Delilah insisted on checking his wound again. The bandage showed spots of fresh blood, confirming her fears that the riding had reopened the injury. "It needs cleaning again," she said, no room for argument in her tone. This time Daniel didn't protest, allowing her to remove the soiled bandage and tend to the wound once more. As she worked, Delilah became acutely aware of his proximity, of the steady rhythm of his breathing, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips. She found herself noticing details she had no business observing: the faint scars that spoke of old injuries, the solid strength of muscles earned through years of physical labor, the clean masculine scent of him beneath the day's exertions. "You have gentle hands," Daniel murmured, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Delilah felt her cheeks warm. "My mother always said that gentleness is more important than skill when tending wounds. The body knows when it's being cared for with kindness." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Delilah replied softly. "She died when I was 16. I'm sorry." The simple words carried genuine feeling. Delilah secured the fresh bandage and reluctantly withdrew her hands. "There, try to rest now. I can keep watch for a while." Daniel shook his head. "You're the one who needs rest." His eyes dropped to her swollen belly. "How's the little one?" "Active," Delilah smiled despite their circumstances. "Would you like to feel? Sometimes you can see the movement." She expected him to decline. Most men found such things uncomfortable at best, but Daniel surprised her by nodding. Carefully, she took his hand and placed it against the side of her belly where the baby had been most active. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if responding to the new touch, the baby delivered a solid kick right against Daniel's palm. His eyes widened in wonder, a genuine smile transforming his face. "That's quite a strong one you've got there," he said, something like awe in his voice. "He or she takes after their father that way," Delilah replied without thinking. "Thomas was stubborn too." Daniel's smile faded slightly and he withdrew his hand. "You should try to sleep," he said, shifting back to his side of their small shelter. "I'll wake you in a few hours to change watch." Delilah felt the loss of the moment keenly, but didn't protest. She arranged her saddle and blanket into a makeshift bed, positioning herself as comfortably as possible on the hard ground. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow in coming. Her mind raced with the events of the past 2 days: the attack, the rescue, the discovery of the gold, the shootout. And now this strange night on a mountainside with a man who was still largely a mystery to her. What was even stranger was how safe she felt despite their precarious situation. Something about Daniel Archer inspired trust, a sense that he would indeed protect her and her unborn child with his life if necessary. It had been a long time since Delilah had trusted anyone so completely. She must have drifted off eventually because she woke to Daniel's gentle hand on her shoulder. The cave was pitch dark now, the moon having set behind the mountain. "Your turn to rest," she whispered. Noting the lines of fatigue etched deep in his face, Daniel hesitated. "I'm not sure you need sleep to heal," Delilah insisted. "I'll wake you if I hear anything." Reluctantly, he stretched out on his bedroll, grimacing as the movement pulled at his injured side. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened, exhaustion finally claiming him. Delilah moved to the mouth of the cave, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders against the mountain chill. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Below, the foothills and plains stretched away toward the distant lights of settlements. Somewhere out there, the Blackwell Gang was still searching for them, for the gold that now rested in a saddlebag just a few feet away. What would happen when they reached Garrison? She wondered. Daniel would deliver the gold to the authorities, she would board her train, and they would go their separate ways. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. In the space of 2 days, this quiet, honorable man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully explain, even to herself. The night passed slowly, marked only by the movement of stars across the sky and the occasional rustling of nocturnal creatures in the underbrush. Delilah remained vigilant, though her thoughts often drifted to the sleeping man behind her and the uncertain future that awaited them both. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon when Daniel stirred. He joined her at the cave entrance, moving more easily than the night before. "You should have woken me," he chided gently. "You kept watch all night. You needed the rest more than I did," Delilah replied simply. "How's your side?" "Better." Daniel stretched cautiously. "Still sore, but the bleeding stopped. Your doctoring skills are impressive." "Hardly doctoring," Delilah demurred. "Just basic care." Daniel's eyes held hers for a moment. "Thank you all the same." They broke camp efficiently, sharing the last of their provisions for a quick breakfast before saddling the horses. The trail ahead would take them over Elkhorn Pass and down into the valley, where Garrison lay with its precious railroad connection to the east. "We should reach the pass by midday," Daniel explained as they mounted. "From there, it's mostly downhill to Garrison. If we push, we can make it by nightfall." Delilah nodded, trying to ignore the hollowness that had settled in her chest at the thought of their journey's end. "What will you do?" "After I mean." Daniel secured the saddlebag containing the gold. "Take this to Marshal Prescott in Helena. With the evidence from your husband's journal and the gold itself, he'll have what he needs to bring charges against the Blackwell Gang." And then, Daniel shrugged. "Continue what I started, I suppose. Find a quiet piece of land, raise some horses." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "What about you? Are you certain about returning east?" "I don't have much choice," Delilah replied. "There's nothing for me here anymore. No home, no family." Daniel seemed about to say something more, but instead turned his attention to the trail ahead. "We should get moving. Stay close." The path grew steeper as they climbed, winding through rocky terrain where a misstep could send horse and rider tumbling down treacherous slopes. Daniel led the way, occasionally dismounting to guide his stallion through particularly difficult stretches, then returning to help Delilah navigate the same obstacles. By mid-morning, they had climbed high enough that the air had thinned noticeably, making breathing more labored. Delilah found herself having to stop frequently, her pregnancy making the altitude more challenging. Daniel was unfailingly patient, never rushing her, always ensuring she had time to rest. "Not much farther to the pass," he encouraged during one such break, offering her the canteen. "The worst of the climb is behind us." Delilah drank gratefully, passing the water back to him. "I'm slowing us down. We're making good time," Daniel assured her, "and I'd rather move carefully than risk a fall." They continued upward, the trail narrowing as it approached a rocky saddle between two higher peaks. Just as they reached a switchback that would take them the final quarter-mile to the pass, Daniel suddenly raised his hand in a signal to halt. "What is it?" Delilah whispered, instantly alert. Daniel gestured for silence, his head tilted as he listened intently. After a moment, he dismounted and moved to a rocky outcropping that provided a view of the trail below. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Riders, 4 of them, following our trail." Delilah's heart sank. "Blackwell." Daniel nodded. "They're about an hour behind us, moving fast." He scanned the path ahead, considering options. "We need to reach the pass before they catch up. Once we're over, we have a better chance of losing them in the forest on the other side." They pushed forward with renewed urgency, the horses straining against the steep incline. Delilah gritted her teeth against her fatigue, focusing on each step forward rather than the pursuers behind. Daniel stayed close, occasionally reaching over to help guide her mare around obstacles. The final approach to the pass was the most challenging, a narrow path along a rocky ledge with a sheer drop to one side. Daniel dismounted again, leading his horse first to ensure the way was safe, then returning for Delilah. "I'll lead your mare," he said, taking the reins. "Just stay centered in the saddle and let the horse do the work." Delilah nodded, trying to control her breathing as they edged along the precipitous trail. She kept her eyes fixed on Daniel's back, refusing to look at the drop beside them. "One step at a time," she told herself. One step closer to safety. They had almost reached the wider ground of the pass when a rifle shot echoed against the mountain walls. The bullet struck rock near Daniel's feet, sending chips flying. "They're closer than I thought," Daniel muttered, urging the horses forward with greater speed. "Come on!" They cleared the narrow ledge just as more shots rang out. Ahead lay Elkhorn Pass itself, a broad, relatively flat expanse between peaks, with the descending trail visible on the far side. But between them and that trail stood 3 mounted men, rifles raised. "Expecting us, were you?" Daniel said coldly, drawing his revolver as he positioned himself between Delilah and the newcomers. The man in the center, not Blackwell, but clearly another member of the gang, smiled thinly. "Marshall's been asking too many questions lately. Figured someone might try to bring him evidence." "All the passes are watched." "Let the woman go," Daniel said. "She's innocent in all this." "No witnesses," the outlaw replied with a shrug. "Besides, she's seen the gold. Drop your weapons, both of you. Maybe we'll make it quick." Delilah's mind raced, calculating the impossible odds. 3 men before them, and judging by the continued gunfire, at least 2 more climbing the trail behind. Daniel was injured, and she was in no condition for a desperate flight. Just as she was resigning herself to their fate, hoofbeats thundered from the trail leading down from the pass. For a moment, Delilah feared more outlaws had arrived, but the expressions of shock on their opponents' faces told a different story. "U.S. Marshal!" a commanding voice shouted as 5 riders in long coats galloped into view, badges gleaming on their chests, rifles at the ready. "Drop your weapons." Chaos erupted on the pass. 2 of the outlaws wheeled their horses to flee, only to find themselves facing Blackwell and his men coming up the trail. Caught between lawmen and their own gang, they hesitated fatally long enough for the marshals to take aim. Down. Daniel shouted, pulling Delilah from her saddle and shielding her with his body as gunfire erupted from both directions. The shootout was brief, but intense. When it ended, 3 outlaws lay dead on the rocky ground while Blackwell and 1 other had been captured. The remaining gang member had apparently decided to take his chances on the treacherous mountain trails, disappearing over the edge of the pass. Daniel helped Delilah to her feet as the lead marshal approached. He was an older man with a silver mustache and weathered features that had seen their share of frontier justice. "Daniel Archer," the lawman greeted, extending his hand. "Right on schedule." Daniel clasped the offered hand. "Marshal Prescott, your timing is impeccable." Delilah looked between them in confusion. "You were expecting each other?" Daniel had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Not exactly." But I did send a telegram from my cabin while you were sleeping that first night, told Prescott we had evidence and would be crossing Elkhorn Pass today. You might have mentioned that, Delilah said, unsure whether to be relieved or irritated. Didn't want to get your hopes up in case they didn't receive the message in time, Daniel explained. Or in case Blackwell had men watching the telegraph office. Marshal Prescott turned his attention to Delilah. Mrs. Johnson, I presume, Daniel's message mentioned you were in a delicate condition. Are you all right, madam? I'm fine, Delilah assured him, though in truth she felt light-headed from the combination of altitude, exertion, and the shock of the gunfight. Just ready for this to be over. We have horses waiting at the bottom of the pass, Prescott said, and a doctor in garrison. We'll have you there by nightfall, he looked to Daniel. You have the evidence. Daniel retrieved the saddlebag containing the gold box. Government shipment, just as you suspected. Mrs. Johnson's husband discovered its location before he was killed. His journal contains details that should help build your case. As the marshals secured their prisoners and prepared to descend the mountain, Delilah found a moment alone with Daniel. You knew the marshals would be waiting, she said. It wasn't quite an accusation, but close. Daniel met her gaze steadily. I hoped they would be. It was our best chance. Why didn't you tell me? You had enough to worry about, he replied simply. And if things had gone wrong, I didn't want you burdened with knowledge that might put you in more danger. Delilah considered this. You took a tremendous risk. For both of us, Daniel acknowledged. But sometimes the right path isn't the safe one. Before she could respond, Marshal Prescott called them to join the procession down the mountain. The journey to Garrison passed in something of a blur for Delilah. The descent was easier physically than the climb had been. But emotionally, each step brought her closer to a parting she found herself increasingly reluctant to face. As promised, they reached Garrison by early evening. The small railroad town consisted of little more than a main street with basic amenities: a hotel, general store, saloon, and the all-important train station. Marshal Prescott escorted them directly to the town's doctor, insisting that both Delilah and Daniel be examined before anything else. The doctor, a kindly older man named Peterson, pronounced Delilah healthy despite her ordeal, assuring her that the baby showed no signs of distress. Daniel's wound required proper stitching, which the doctor provided while Delilah waited in an adjoining room. When Daniel emerged, properly bandaged and moving more easily, Marshal Prescott was waiting to escort them to the hotel where rooms had been arranged. The eastbound train leaves at 10 tomorrow morning, Prescott informed Delilah. I've confirmed your ticket is still valid. You'll be in Chicago in 3 days. Thank you, Marshal, Delilah replied automatically, though the news brought little joy. I've assigned a deputy to remain with you until departure, Prescott continued. Just a precaution. Daniel and I have business with the territorial judge in the morning regarding Blackwell and his accomplice. They parted in the hotel lobby, Prescott to secure the prisoners, and Daniel to accompany Delilah to her room. The deputy, a young man named Miller, took up position in the hallway outside, tipping his hat respectfully as Daniel opened the door for Delilah. The room was simple but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed that promised the first real rest Delilah had experienced in days. Still, she found herself reluctant to bid Daniel good night. Will I see you before the train leaves? She asked, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, fatigue evident in the set of his shoulders despite his attempt to appear casual. Of course. I'll escort you to the station myself. Delilah nodded, searching for words to express the tumult of emotions she was experiencing. Daniel, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. No thanks needed, he replied quietly. Anyone would have done the same. No, Delilah said with sudden conviction. They wouldn't have. What you did risking your life for a stranger, keeping your promise to protect us, that's not something anyone would do. Daniel's expression softened. You're giving me too much credit. Besides, you saved me too. That wound would have festered without your care. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Daniel straightened, wincing slightly at the movement. "You should rest," he said. "It's been a long few days." "Yes," Delilah agreed, though rest was the furthest thing from her mind at that moment. "Good night, Daniel. Good night, Delilah." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded and closed the door quietly behind him. Alone, Delilah sank onto the edge of the bed, one hand absently stroking her belly as the baby shifted restlessly. Tomorrow she would board a train that would carry her away from Montana, away from danger and away from Daniel Archer, the man who had come to mean so much to her in so short a time. It was for the best, she told herself firmly. She had a child to think of, a future to secure. Daniel had his own path to follow, his own ghosts to lay to rest. Their brief intersection had been a product of extraordinary circumstances, nothing more. Yet as she prepared for bed, Delilah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to make a terrible mistake. Morning arrived with dismal weather that matched Delilah's mood, gray skies, and a steady drizzle that turned Garrison's unpaved streets to mud. She dressed carefully in her traveling clothes, packed her few belongings, and waited for Daniel's promised escort to the station. When a knock came at precisely 9 o'clock, she opened the door to find not Daniel but Deputy Miller, hat in hand. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Johnson," he said apologetically, "but Marshal Prescott sent me to escort you to the station. Mr. Archer was called to give additional testimony to the judge this morning." Disappointment washed over Delilah, though she maintained a composed expression. "I see. Thank you, Deputy. I'm ready whenever you are." As they walked to the station, Delilah found herself scanning the streets, hoping for a glimpse of Daniel's tall figure. The rational part of her mind chided such foolishness. What difference would a final goodbye make when their paths were diverging regardless? The station platform was busy despite the weather. Travelers huddled under the overhang as they waited for the eastbound train that could already be seen approaching in the distance. Deputy Miller secured Delilah's luggage with the porter and escorted her to a bench near the ticket office. "Train's on time, madam," he informed her. "Should be boarding in about 15 minutes. "Thank you," Delilah replied distantly, her attention still focused on the street leading to the station. The train's whistle sounded as it pulled into the station, brakes screeching as it slowed to a stop. Passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to board as the conductor called out destinations. Deputy Miller helped Delilah to her feet, offering his arm for support. "Mrs. Johnson?" The voice cut through the station noise, causing Delilah to turn so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Daniel was striding across the platform, ignoring the rain that soaked his hat and coat. His expression was one of determination mixed with something else, an emotion Delilah hardly dared name. "I thought you were with the judge," she said as he reached her side, breathless from his evident rush. "I was," Daniel confirmed, "just finished." He nodded to Deputy Miller. "Thank you for escorting Mrs. Johnson. I can take it from here." The young deputy tipped his hat and discreetly withdrew, leaving them standing alone amid the bustle of boarding passengers. "I'm glad you came," Delilah admitted. "I was afraid I wouldn't get to say goodbye." Daniel's eyes held hers intently. "That's just it. I'm not sure I want to say goodbye," Delilah's heart stuttered. "What do you mean, I mean?" Daniel took a deep breath, seemingly gathering his courage. "I know we've only known each other a few days. I know the circumstances have been extraordinary. But in those few days, I've come to care for you, Delilah, more than I thought possible." The train whistle blew again, the final boarding call. "I have nothing to offer you," Daniel continued hurriedly. "Just a small cabin and an uncertain future. But if you wanted to stay, if you could see yourself building a life here, I would do everything in my power to make you and your child happy." Delilah stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "Daniel, I'm not asking for promises," he hastened to add. "Just time to see if what I feel, what I hope you might feel too, is real." His voice dropped lower. "I meant what I said when we first met. They'll never touch you or your child again. I'll protect you both with my life if you'll let me." The conductor was calling the final boarding. Passengers were climbing aboard, doors beginning to close. The moment of decision was upon her. Delilah thought of Cincinnati, of her aunt's comfortable but controlled household, of raising her child amid whispers and judgments. Then she thought of Montana, wild and dangerous, yes, but also beautiful and free. She thought of Daniel, of his quiet strength and unwavering honor, of the way he had risked everything for her without hesitation. "My ticket is for a one-way journey," she said slowly. Daniel's face fell slightly. "I understand." "It's too much to ask, no," Delilah interrupted, reaching for his hand. "I meant that I have nothing waiting for me in Cincinnati, no home of my own, no certain welcome." She took a deep breath. "But here I might have both," hope dawned in Daniel's eyes. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to stay," Delilah said simply. "I'd like the chance to see if what's between us could grow into something lasting." The relief and joy that transformed Daniel's face told her everything she needed to know about the rightness of her decision. Without hesitation, he drew her gently into his arms, mindful of her condition. "I'll make you proud of that choice," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day." As the train pulled away from the station without her, Delilah felt not regret but a profound sense of rightness. The future held no certainties. Life in the Montana Territory never could, but for the first time since Thomas's death. She faced that future with hope rather than fear. 3 months later, Daniel paced the floor of their cabin, for it was truly theirs now, transformed by Delilah's touch into a warm home while Dr. Peterson attended the birth in the bedroom. Each cry that filtered through the closed door tested Daniel's resolve to remain outside as requested, his hands clenching into fists with the need to comfort, to protect. When a new cry joined Delilah's, the unmistakable wail of a newborn taking its first breath, Daniel froze mid-stride, his heart seeming to stop before racing forward with renewed purpose. The door opened, and Dr. Peterson emerged, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. Archer. You have a son." Mother and child are both doing splendidly. Daniel hardly heard the rest of the doctor's instructions, so eager was he to enter the bedroom. There he found Delilah propped against pillows, tired but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she invited softly. Daniel approached almost reverently, perching on the edge of the bed to peer at the tiny face nestled against Delilah's breast. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of all newborns. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, reaching out to touch one miniature hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers curled around his, a grip surprisingly strong for one so small. "I thought we might name him Thomas Jacob," Delilah suggested, "to honor both his father and your partner." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. "I think that's a fine name." He met Delilah's gaze, finding in it all the love and certainty he could ever have hoped for. "Though as far as I'm concerned, he has 2 fathers, one who gave him life and one who will be here to guide him through it." Delilah's free hand found his. "I love you, Daniel Archer." "And I love you, Delilah Johnson Archer," he replied, the name still new enough to bring a smile to both their lips. They had married a month after her decision to stay, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Grass Valley, with Marshall Prescott standing as witness. The Blackwell Gang was no more its leader sentenced to hang, the rest scattered or imprisoned. The stolen gold had been returned to the government, though a modest reward had allowed Daniel and Delilah to purchase the land adjacent to his cabin, expanding their holdings into what would one day become a proper horse ranch. As Daniel gazed at his wife and their newborn son, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed in the space of a few months. The grief and solitude that had defined his existence since Jacob's death had given way to purpose, to family, to a future bright with promise, despite the challenges that frontier life would inevitably bring. "They'll never touch either of you," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to Delilah's forehead, then one to the baby's downy head. "That's a promise I'll keep for the rest of my days." I know, Delilah replied simply, her trust in him absolute. Outside, the Montana winter had settled across the land, snow blanketing the hills and valleys in pristine white. But within the walls of their cabin, warmth and life flourished, a testament to the love that had begun in danger, but would endure long after the echoes of gunfire had faded from memory. 5 years later, Daniel stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Delilah guided young Thomas through his reading lesson at the outdoor table. Beside them sat their daughter, Elizabeth, just turned 3, solemnly coloring in a drawing book with the intense concentration only a child can muster. The Archer Ranch had prospered beyond their modest expectations. Daniel's gift with horses had attracted buyers from as far away as St. Louis, and their breeding stock was now considered among the finest in the territory. Delilah had established a small school in what had once been Daniel's bachelor cabin, teaching the children of neighboring ranchers alongside their own. Grass Valley itself had grown from a struggling settlement into a proper town, with a permanent sheriff's office, a bank, and even a small hotel for travelers passing through on their way to Helena or the railroad at Garrison. Progress was slowly taming the wilderness, though the spirit of the frontier remained in the self-reliance and neighborly support that defined community life. "Papa," Thomas called, spotting him on the porch. "Come see, I read the whole page without help." Daniel smiled, crossing the yard to join his family. The boy was the image of Delilah with his golden hair and curious nature, though he had Daniel's blue eyes, a fact that never failed to touch Daniel deeply, as if Thomas had somehow been meant to bridge the two families he represented. "Let's hear it then, Cowboy," Daniel encouraged, settling onto the bench beside his son. As Thomas proudly demonstrated his reading skills, Daniel caught Delilah's eye over the boy's head. The look that passed between them held all the quiet understanding of years shared, challenges overcome, and a love that had only deepened with time. Their journey had not been without difficulties. The first winter after Thomas's birth had been particularly harsh, testing their resources and resolve. There had been a tense encounter with 2 remaining members of the Blackwell Gang the following spring, men seeking revenge rather than gold, quickly dispatched by Daniel with help from neighbors who had come to consider the Archer's family. Through it all, the promise Daniel had made that first day on the prairie had remained his guiding principle. "They'll never touch you or your child again." It was a vow he had expanded to include Elizabeth upon her birth, and one he renewed silently each morning when he woke beside Delilah, marveling at the life they had built together. As Thomas finished his reading with a flourish, Daniel pulled him into a congratulatory hug. "Well done. Soon you'll be reading those big books in your mama's school all by yourself. And then I can help teach the little kids like Mama does," Thomas declared confidently. "I help too," Elizabeth piped up, not to be outdone, waving her crayon in the air for emphasis. Delilah laughed, gathering her daughter onto her lap. "Yes, sweetheart, you're a wonderful helper already." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the road leading to the ranch. Daniel recognized Marshal Prescott's distinctive figure even at a distance, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Looks like we have visitors," he observed, rising to greet them. Over the years, Prescott had become a friend as well as an ally, stopping by whenever his duties brought him to their part of the territory. "Marshal Prescott," Thomas exclaimed excitedly, running to meet the lawman as he dismounted at the gate. "Did you bring me a badge this time?" Prescott chuckled, tousling the boy's hair affectionately. "Not today, young man, but perhaps next visit." "You're growing so fast you'll be joining the marshals before we know it." Delilah came forward, Elizabeth on her hip, to welcome their guests. "Perfect timing, Marshal. We were just about to have some coffee and apple pie. Won't you join us?" "Wouldn't miss your pie for anything, Mrs. Archer," Prescott replied with a tip of his hat. "But I'm afraid this isn't purely a social call." He glanced at Daniel meaningfully. "Got some news you'll want to hear." Daniel nodded, understanding. Delilah, why don't you take the children inside and get that pie ready? We'll be along shortly. Once the family had retreated to the house, Daniel led Prescott and his deputies to the shade of the large oak tree that dominated the front yard. "What's happened?" he asked without preamble. "Jed Blackwell escaped during transport to Wyoming territory," Prescott said grimly, referring to the former gang leader's younger brother who had been captured the previous year. "Killed 2 guards in the process." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Any idea where he's headed?" "Not specifically, but he was overheard making threats against you before the escape. Said he had unfinished business with the man who destroyed his family." "I appreciate the warning," Daniel said, his mind already calculating what precautions would be necessary. "How many men broke out with him?" "Just one other, that tracker who used to ride with them, Sam Whitley." Prescott's expression was grave. "They're dangerous, Daniel. Whitley can follow a trail better than most Indians, and Jed's had nothing but time to nurse his grudge." "We'll be ready," Daniel assured him, though concern coiled in his stomach at the thought of danger approaching his family once again. "I've made some improvements to the ranch since you were here last. Better defenses." Prescott nodded. "I've left deputies in Grass Valley, and I'll send word to all the neighboring ranches to keep watch. Still, might be wise to send Delilah and the children to stay in town until this is resolved." Daniel considered this but shook his head. Delilah wouldn't go. "She'd insist on facing this together, and she'd be right. We're stronger as a family." He managed a grim smile. "Besides, you haven't seen her with a shotgun. She's quite impressive." The marshal didn't look entirely convinced but respected Daniel's decision. "We'll catch them, Daniel. Just stay alert until we do." After Prescott and his men had enjoyed their pie and departed with promises of frequent patrols, Daniel pulled Delilah aside to explain the situation. As he'd predicted, she refused any suggestion of taking the children to town. "This is our home," she said firmly. "We've faced threats before and survived them together. I won't teach our children to run at the first sign of trouble." Daniel couldn't help but admire her courage, even as he worried for her safety. "We'll need to be careful. No riding out alone. Keep the children close to the house and always be armed." "Agreed," Delilah said practically. "Should we tell Thomas? He's old enough to understand some of it, and I'd rather he be cautious than curious." They decided on a simplified explanation for their son that some bad men might be in the area, and extra safety rules would be in place until the marshal caught them. Thomas accepted this with the solemnity of a child who had grown up on frontier stories, promising to help watch over his sister. The next 2 weeks passed without incident, though the atmosphere at the ranch remained vigilant. Daniel took to sleeping lightly, a loaded rifle within reach, while Delilah kept a revolver in her apron pocket as she went about her daily tasks. They continued their routine as normally as possible for the children's sake, but both adults remained constantly alert to any unusual sights or sounds. It was Elizabeth who first noticed something amiss. Playing in the fenced garden one afternoon while Delilah gathered vegetables for dinner, the little girl suddenly pointed toward the tree line beyond the corral. "Mama, horse," she said simply. Delilah followed her daughter's gaze but saw nothing. Still, she trusted the child's sharp eyes. "Where, sweetheart? Show Mama." "Gone now," Elizabeth replied with a child's easy acceptance. "Behind trees." Delilah gathered the children immediately and hurried to the house, where Daniel was repairing tack at the kitchen table. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "Elizabeth saw a horse near the north tree line," she explained as she set the children up with quiet activities in the bedroom. "I didn't see anything, but she wouldn't make it up," Daniel finished, already moving to retrieve his rifle. "Stay inside with the children. I'll check the perimeter." "Be careful," Delilah urged, pressing a quick kiss to his lips before he headed out. Daniel circled the property cautiously, checking first the area Elizabeth had indicated. The ground there showed faint tracks a single horse recently passed. He followed the sign to the edge of their land, where it joined a game trail leading into the hills beyond. The rider had been observing the ranch, likely assessing its defenses and daily patterns. When he returned to the house, Daniel found Delilah had moved the large oak table against the front door as a barricade and closed all the shutters. "They're watching us," he confirmed grimly. "Probably have been for days." Delilah nodded, her face resolute despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. "What do we do? Send one of the hands to alert Prescott," Daniel decided, referring to the 3 ranch workers who lived in the bunkhouse near the stables. "The rest of us prepare for visitors." As darkness fell, the ranch was as secure as they could make it. The hands' loyal men who had worked for Daniel for years were positioned strategically around the property. Inside, Daniel and Delilah had created a defensive position in the central part of the house, with escape routes planned and weapons loaded. They put the children to bed with extra stories, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the tension that filled the air. Once Thomas and Elizabeth were asleep, Delilah joined Daniel in their vigil at the front windows. "You think they'll come tonight?" she asked softly. "Hard to say," Daniel replied. Jed was always the impulsive one of the brothers, but prison might have taught him patience. Delilah's hand found his in the darkness. "Whatever happens, I have no regrets," she said quietly. "The life we've built together, it's been worth every risk." Daniel squeezed her fingers gently. "It's not over yet. We've faced worse odds and come through." They maintained their watch through the night, but dawn arrived without incident. The hand they'd sent to town returned with news that Prescott and a larger posse were on their way, expected to arrive by midday. "Maybe they've moved on," Delilah suggested hopefully as they ate a quick breakfast. "Realized we're too well prepared." Daniel wished he could share her optimism, but something about the situation felt unresolved. Jed Blackwell had waited years for his revenge. He wouldn't abandon it easily. His instincts proved correct shortly before noon when a single rider approached the ranch openly from the main road. Daniel watched through the window as the man stopped at the gate, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "That's Whitley," he told Delilah. "The tracker. What does he want?" "Let's find out." Daniel turned to one of the hands who had come in to report the rider's approach. "Jim, keep watch from the side window. If anything seems wrong, don't hesitate to shoot." Daniel stepped onto the porch, rifle ready but not aimed directly at the visitor. "That's far enough, Whitley," he called. "State your business." The tracker, a lean man with a weathered face and the patient eyes of a predator, offered what might have passed for a friendly smile under different circumstances. "Just delivering a message, Archer. Jed wants to parley." "Nothing to discuss," Daniel replied coldly. "Marshal Prescott and his men will be here any time now. Best for you to surrender peacefully." Whitley shook his head. "Prescott and his posse are halfway to Helena by now, chasing false information about our whereabouts." "Very obliging of your neighbor to the east. What was his name?" "Parker. To provide that tip after Jed explained the situation to his family." Daniel's blood ran cold at the implication. The Parkers were a young couple with an infant son who had settled nearby just the previous year. "If you've harmed them, they're unharmed," Whitley interrupted. "For now. But their continued good health depends on you, Archer. Jed wants to meet, just you and him, settling things man to man." He nodded toward the hills. "There's a clearing 2 miles north of here. Come alone at sunset, or the Parker family won't see morning." Before Daniel could respond, Whitley turned his horse and rode away at an unhurried pace, clearly unconcerned about being shot in the back. Inside, Daniel explained the situation to Delilah, whose face paled at the mention of their neighbor's plight. "It's a trap," she said immediately. "They'll kill you the moment you arrive." "Probably," Daniel agreed, "but if I don't go, they'll kill the Parkers." Young families were always Jed's favorite targets. "Then we need another option," Delilah insisted. "Send the hands to rescue the Parkers while you meet with Jed as a distraction." Daniel considered this. "Possible but risky. We don't know exactly where they're being held, and Whitley is too good a tracker to miss our men approaching." "What about using the old mining tunnels?" Delilah suggested. "The entrance is hidden in that ravine behind the Parker place." Thomas mentioned that John Parker was exploring them just last month. Daniel's estimation of his wife's strategic thinking rose yet again. The tunnels were a remnant of an abandoned silver mining operation, largely forgotten but potentially providing a covered approach to the Parker homestead. "It could work," he said slowly. "Jim knows those tunnels from his prospecting days. He could lead a rescue party through them while I keep Blackwell occupied at the meeting." They spent the afternoon planning, sending one hand to continue toward Grass Valley in hopes of finding any lawman who hadn't been misled by the false information, while Jim and the remaining hand prepared for the tunnel approach. As sunset neared, Daniel and Delilah shared a private moment in their bedroom while the children played under Jim's watchful eye in the kitchen. "I should be coming with you," Delilah said as she helped Daniel check his weapons one final time. "Your place is here with the children," Daniel replied gently. "If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong," Delilah interrupted fiercely. "You promised to protect us, remember? That means you have to come back." Daniel drew her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. "I remember every word of that promise. They'll never touch you or your children again, not Blackwell, not anyone, whatever it takes." Delilah kissed him with all the passion and fear and hope she possessed, then stepped back, visibly composing herself. "We'll be ready if you need to bring the fight back here," she said, practical once more. "Just give the signal we discussed and we'll know it's you approaching." Daniel nodded, memorizing her face as if for the last time, though he refused to consider that possibility aloud. "I love you, Delilah. You and the children are the best things that ever happened to me. And we'll be waiting when you return," she replied with conviction. "All of us." The clearing Whitley had specified was a natural meadow surrounded by pine trees, open enough to prevent an ambush but isolated enough to ensure privacy. Daniel approached cautiously, scanning the tree line for any movement as he guided his horse to the center of the space. He didn't have to wait long. Jed Blackwell emerged from the trees opposite, astride a sturdy bay horse. Prison had changed him, his once robust frame had thinned, and new lines marked his face, giving him the appearance of a man much older than his 30-odd years. But the hatred in his eyes remained familiar. "Archer," he acknowledged coldly, "wasn't sure you'd come." "You knew I would," Daniel replied, keeping his horse still with practiced ease. "You made sure of that by threatening innocence." Blackwell's laugh held no humor. "Still playing the hero, I see. That's what got my brother killed, your misplaced sense of chivalry." "Your brother got himself killed by choosing a life of crime," Daniel corrected. "Just as you did. The difference is you still have a chance to surrender and surrender." Blackwell spat on the ground. "I didn't break out of territorial prison to surrender. I came to make you pay for destroying my family." Daniel watched the outlaw carefully, noting the way his right hand hovered near his holster. Blackwell had always been fast, but prison likely hadn't allowed much practice. Still, desperation made men dangerous. "Your family destroyed itself," Daniel said evenly. "Your brother died because he tried to harm a pregnant woman. The rest of your gang either faced justice or scattered to the winds. It's over, Jed." "It's not over until I say it is," Blackwell snarled. "You took everything from me, my brother, my freedom, my reputation. Now I'm going to take everything from you." A cruel smile twisted his features. "Starting with that pretty wife and those 2 children." Daniel's expression hardened, though he kept his voice level. "You're not going to touch my family, not today, not ever." "Oh, but I will," Blackwell promised. "See, while you're out here talking to me, Whitley is paying a visit to your ranch. Your wife might be handy with a shotgun, but she won't be expecting him to come through the root cellar." Cold dread washed over Daniel. The root cellar and addition they'd built just that spring, with an entrance from outside the main house. It was a vulnerability they'd overlooked in their defensive preparations. Blackwell saw the realization in Daniel's eyes and laughed again. "By the time you get back, it'll all be over." Whitley has specific instructions about what to do with each of them. Slow and painful for your wife, quick for the little girl, the boy we might keep alive a while he's old enough to remember watching his mother die. You're lying, Daniel said, though doubt gnawed at him. Whitley is with the Parkers. The Parkers? Blackwell looked genuinely confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. Ah, their homestead was convenient for our purposes, but they're long gone, headed for Oregon last I heard, after selling their claim to a very persuasive buyer. His smile widened. We've had weeks to plan this, Archer. Did you really think we'd be so obvious? Daniel's mind raced. If the Parkers had sold their land, if there was no hostage situation. The entire rescue plan was based on a lie. His family was in danger and he was miles away. Blackwell drew his pistol with practiced speed despite his years away from gunfighting. This is the part where you die, Archer. Then I ride to your ranch and watch while Whitley finishes your family. Time seemed to slow as Daniel made his choice. He could draw and fire, possibly kill Blackwell, but almost certainly take a bullet himself in the process. Or he could attempt a desperate ride back to the ranch, hoping to reach Delilah and the children before Whitley could harm them. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. Daniel whirled his horse and galloped for the trees, Blackwell's bullet whistling past his ear as he rode. More shots followed, one grazing his upper arm, but Daniel didn't slow. Every second mattered now. Behind him, he could hear Blackwell cursing and giving chase, but Daniel's stallion was the faster mount, especially with the head start. He pushed the horse to its limits, taking the most direct route back to the ranch even when it meant dangerous jumps or steep descents. The sun had fully set by the time the ranch came into view, throwing the buildings into shadow against the twilight sky. Daniel's heart pounded as he searched for any sign of trouble: smoke, movement, the flash of gunfire, but the property appeared peaceful. Until he saw the root cellar doors standing open. Daniel dismounted at a full gallop, hitting the ground running with his rifle already in hand. He approached the cellar with every sense alert, expecting an ambush. But when he reached the open doors, all he found were empty shelves, no sign of struggle, no blood, no Whitley. Dread mounting, he turned toward the main house. The windows were dark, no lanterns lit despite the growing darkness. The front door stood partially open. Delilah. He called, caution forgotten in his fear. Thomas, Elizabeth. Silence answered him as he bounded up the porch steps and into the house, rifle at the ready. The interior was shadowy but undisturbed, no overturned furniture, no signs of violence. He moved swiftly from room to room, finding each empty, until only the master bedroom remained unchecked. Hand on the doorknob, Daniel steeled himself for what he might find. Then, taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The sight that greeted him nearly brought him to his knees. Sam Whitley lay face down on the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath him from what appeared to be a fatal wound to his chest. And standing over him, shotgun still trained on the fallen man, was Delilah. She looked up as Daniel entered, relief flooding her face. "You're alive," she breathed, lowering the weapon slightly. "When we heard the cellar doors." "Where are the children?" Daniel asked urgently, still unable to fully process the scene before him. "Safe," Delilah assured him, "hidden in the priest hole behind the bookcase, just as we planned." She nodded toward Whitley's body. "He came through the cellar just as you suspected someone might. I was waiting." Daniel crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering Delilah into a one-armed embrace while keeping his rifle ready. "Blackwell is right behind me," he warned. "We need to get ready." Delilah nodded, all business despite the tremor he could feel in her body. "Jim and Pete, likely still in the tunnels, searching for hostages who don't exist," Daniel explained quickly. "The Parkers sold their claim. It was all a ruse to separate us." Understanding dawned in Delilah's eyes. "The children," she said, moving toward the hidden compartment they had built into the house when they first expanded it, a precaution born of frontier wisdom that had now proved its worth. Daniel positioned himself at the bedroom window, which offered a clear view of the approach to the house. In the fading light, he could make out a lone rider galloping toward them, Blackwell, closing in fast. "Get the children to the storm cellar," Daniel instructed. "It's more defensible than the house." Delilah had already opened the hidden panel, revealing Thomas and Elizabeth huddled inside the small space. Both children looked frightened but unharmed. "Come, darlings," she said with remarkable calm. "We're going to play a game of hide and seek in the special cellar." As Delilah ushered the children toward the back of the house, Daniel took up position on the front porch, rifle trained on Blackwell's approaching figure. He could end it now with a single shot at long range, a skill he had honed during his cavalry days. But something stayed his finger on the trigger. Perhaps it was the knowledge that Blackwell deserved to face proper justice rather than frontier expediency. Or perhaps it was simply that Daniel had promised himself long ago when he left the army that he would never again kill a man who hadn't been given fair warning. "Blackwell," he called when the rider was within earshot. "Your partner's dead. There's no one left to help you. Surrender now." Blackwell responded by firing wildly in Daniel's direction, bullets splintering wood around the porch. Daniel returned fire more precisely, aiming not to kill but to unhorse. His second shot found its mark, striking Blackwell's mount in the flank. The horse reared in pain, throwing its rider before bolting away. Blackwell landed hard but rolled to his feet with the agility of desperation, taking cover behind the water trough near the front gate. The standoff had begun. For nearly an hour, they exchanged sporadic gunfire, neither man able to gain a clear advantage. Darkness had fully descended, limiting visibility to what little the quarter moon provided. Daniel maintained his position, knowing the house layout gave him the upper hand if Blackwell tried to rush the building. In the distance, the sound of multiple riders approaching drew both men's attention. Daniel's heart lifted at the familiar voice that called out from the darkness. "Daniel Archer, Marshal Prescott here. We've got the place surrounded." Blackwell cursed loudly enough for Daniel to hear. "You're lying. There's no posse. Surrender, Blackwell," Prescott called. "You've got nowhere to go." In the silver moonlight, Daniel could see Blackwell's desperate calculation. The Outlaws' gun was likely running low on ammunition after their prolonged exchange, and even if Prescott was bluffing about the size of his force, Blackwell now faced at least 2 armed men instead of 1. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Blackwell rose from his cover, guns in both hands, and charged toward the house in a suicidal final attack. Daniel fired once, hitting the outlaw in the leg, but Blackwell kept coming, driven by hatred and the knowledge that his fate was sealed regardless. Prescott's rifle cracked from the darkness, followed by shots from at least 2 other positions. Blackwell staggered but maintained his forward momentum for 3 more steps before collapsing face down in the dirt of the Archer front yard, not 20 feet from the porch. Daniel approached cautiously, rifle trained on the fallen man, but it was immediately clear that Jed Blackwell would threaten no one ever again. Multiple wounds had ensured his final attack was indeed his last act on Earth. Marshal Prescott emerged from the shadows, followed by 4 deputies. "Your man found us on the road to Grass Valley," he explained. "Good thing, too, we might have been halfway to Helena otherwise." "The Parkers?" Daniel asked. "Safe," Prescott confirmed. "They did sell their claim last month, moved to Oregon to be near her family." "The buyers haven't arrived yet to take possession." Daniel nodded, relief washing through him as the immediate danger passed. "Whitley's dead inside. Delilah got him when he tried to come through the root cellar." Prescott's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Remind me never to cross Mrs. Archer," he said with a hint of admiration. "Where is she now?" "Storm cellar with the children," Daniel replied, already moving toward the back of the house. "I need to let them know it's over." The reunion that followed would remain etched in Daniel's memory alongside the most precious moments of his life, Delilah's fierce embrace as he opened the cellar doors, Thomas's excited questions about the bad men, Elizabeth's silent determination to remain brave even as she clung to her father's leg. They were safe, all of them. Later, after the bodies had been removed, statements taken, and the children finally asleep in their own beds, Daniel and Delilah stood together on the porch, watching as the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon. "It's really over now," Delilah said softly, leaning into Daniel's side. "The last of them is gone." Daniel nodded, his arm tightening around her waist. "We can finally put it all behind us." He turned to face her fully, cupping her cheek with gentle fingers. "You were remarkable tonight. Brave beyond words." "I just did what needed doing," Delilah replied simply. "The same as you." Her eyes searched his face. "When Whitley came through that cellar door, all I could think was that I had to keep my family safe until you returned. I never doubted that you would. Even when I was supposed to be meeting Blackwell miles away," a small smile touched her lips. "Especially then. I knew that the moment you suspected something was wrong, nothing would keep you from getting back to us." Daniel kissed her then, pouring into it all the fear and relief and love that words couldn't adequately express. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent that had come to mean home. "I made you a promise the day we met," he said quietly. "That they would never touch you or your child again." "Our children," Delilah corrected gently. "Our children," Daniel agreed with a smile. "I intend to keep that promise for the rest of our lives, no matter what comes." As the sun rose fully over the Montana hills, bathing their land in golden light, Daniel and Delilah Archer stood together on the porch of the home they had built, looking out at the future that stretched before them, a future they would face as they had faced every challenge since that fateful day on the prairie. Together, with courage and unwavering love. The Archer Ranch thrived in the years that followed. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's compassion and his father's steady nature. Elizabeth blossomed into a spirited girl whose determination and intelligence reminded everyone of both her parents. And 2 more children joined the family, twin boys, Michael and James, born exactly 3 years after the night Blackwell met his end. Daniel and Delilah's love story became something of a legend in Grass Valley, retold to newcomers and younger generations as an example of how the wildness of the frontier could forge bonds stronger than steel between people brave enough to claim their happiness against all odds. And on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work done, Daniel would often find Delilah on the porch, gazing at the stars. He would join her there, taking her hand in his, both of them silently acknowledging how far they had come from that desperate moment when a lone rider had appeared on the horizon and changed both their lives forever. "Any regrets?" he would sometimes ask. And Delilah would always answer the same way, with a smile that still took his breath away. "Not a single one."